How are bold ideas born and which ones survive to eventually shake up the status quo? We'll hear straight from our industry's greatest visionaries who are making waves and learn how they turned their dreams into disruptive reality. This is From Dreamers to Disruptors, a podcast powered by Medidata. I'm excited to share the mic for this very special episode of From Dreamers to Disruptors, hosted by our very own Alicia Staley, Chief Patient Officer at Medidata, and featuring Trevor Maxwell, a stage 4 colon cancer survivor and founder of Man Up to Cancer. I know you'll enjoy this conversation about courage, connection, and how one patient's experience became a movement to make sure no man faces cancer alone.
When Trevor Maxwell was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer in 2018, he faced surgeries, treatment, uncertainty, and the emotional weight that often comes with cancer, especially for men who are taught to stay strong by staying silent. Trevor decided to challenge that idea. What began as a parking lot brainstorm became Man Up to Cancer, a nonprofit and peer support community with more than 3,000 members across 40 chapters worldwide. Its message is simple. Strength does not mean going through cancer alone. Trevor is also the author of the highly acclaimed book, Open Heart, Warrior Spirit, A Man's Guide to Living with Cancer. He's a national speaker and a patient leader. He's turned his own experience with cancer into a movement helping men find connection, talk more honestly, and get support before isolation takes over. His incredible work has earned him prestigious honors like the Annette Cook Cancer Warrior Award and the Amanda Dempsey Award. In this episode, we talk about Trevor's personal journey, the moments that shaped Man Up to Cancer, and why community can be a critical part of care. We discuss the cultural barriers that keep many men from asking for help, what it takes to build a movement, and how Trevor is working to make sure no man walks the cancer road alone. This is a conversation about cancer, courage, community, and what it really means to man up. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show the warrior himself, Trevor Maxwell. I'm your host, Alicia Staley, Chief Patient Officer at Medidata. Welcome to From Dreamers to Disruptors. All right, let's get started. So Trevor, for listeners who may not know you, can you just share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. We live in the same neck of the woods. So I live up in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. And from my cancer story, we share a cancer story. My cancer story starts in 2018 when I was 41 years old and middle of my life, and I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic colon cancer, complete life asteroid. No context for it, no preparation for it. Just all of a sudden you go from being in the middle of your life raising kids to facing a life-threatening illness. I've been married to my high school sweetheart. Now it's, 24 years of marriage, 33 years being together since we were teenagers. And at the time I was 41, she was 40, and our daughters, Sage was 12 and Elsie was 10. And so that was really the biggest thing, was going home and telling the kids, right? And getting through that with them. And I'll just lead off by saying, more than 8 years later, Sage is turning 21 this month and Elsie's turning 19. Oh. And I'm going to be the Uber driver for my 21-year-old for her bar crawl. And I just want to lead with that, because I think when you live with cancer for such a long time, really your goals are to hit those milestones with your kids, whether it's teaching them how to drive or getting to those graduations, seeing their ball games and their concerts and all that stuff. So to be able to reach adulthood when the statistics are absolutely not in your favor, like my team thinks that my chances of still being here now based on my disease are around 5%. So knowing how close that is, I just want to start with gratitude. Being here with my family this long later, doing amazing things like this with you is a blessing every day and an honor.
Well, I've known you for a long time. And every time I hear your story, there's a new piece or a new element that I hear that just, also as a cancer survivor, makes me pause and think about how life is truly, it's moment to moment. And like you said, it's how do I live to see my kids graduate or go through a milestone in life. And
And if I could, like,
yeah.
sometimes it's not even the big things, right?
No,
Like sometimes,
doesn't have to be.
like my daughters were home for the summer and they went to get ice cream. And all of a sudden I got a phone call from them like, Dad, we locked our keys in the car. And you don't think about that.
Right.
When you go through something like we've gone through, that moment really hits of being able to answer that call and go show up and laugh about it with them. So sorry to interrupt you, but I think, I think that you get that better than anyone.
Absolutely. No, and I'm glad that you pointed that out, because I think that that's the essence of what survivorship is all about. You want to see those moments. There's beauty in everything that you see, and it's how do you take that in and really embrace it. So
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
let's go back to 2018 just for a second.
Oh, do we have to?
Well, just for a minute.
Okay.
What was going through your mind? Like, how do when you hear that, what were you thinking? What was your thought process? Just sort of taking that in.
I mean, at first it's legitimate shock. Like I didn't have signs or symptoms typical of colon cancer. Like you might think blood in the stool, abnormal bowel habits, that kind of stuff. The only symptom that I had was unusual and persistent fatigue. So, and that was over a long period of time where I just felt more tired and tired. And, I was 41, in the middle of my life, like working and raising a family. Like it wasn't like alarm bells ringing until finally it was. Like I remember, I'm like a big rugged guy. I'm very physical. I love to do athletic things. I love to do physical things. We heat our house with wood a lot. And like I'm splitting wood and hauling it in and like all that stuff. And then that winter before I was diagnosed, my capacity to do all that was just going down. But like a lot of guys and other people, but like a lot of guys, I hadn't seen a doctor I was 41. I didn't have any health problems. I probably hadn't seen a primary care doctor in 7 or 8 years. And so I didn't have that relationship, and I wasn't thinking like, oh, maybe I should think about this, until one day, like I was climbing stairs and my heart is just like pounding through my chest. And my normal resting heart rate was like below 50. And my resting heart rate all of a sudden was up above 70. So finally I made the call to my primary care. And that's when she was like, hey, we need your blood work. Got the blood work. She calls me up Friday night. And when your PCP calls you on a Friday night, it's generally not good. Yeah. And she says, don't do anything strenuous. Like you have basically no iron in your blood. Like are you losing blood anywhere? I said, I've not seen anything. She's like, you don't need a transfusion right now, but you're borderline needing a blood transfusion. So we got to figure this out. Get into a colonoscopy a week later, and I have a 10-centimeter tumor in my ascending colon, which I didn't know much. I knew I had a colon. I knew that it did important things, but I wasn't thinking about it as a 41-year-old. Like, yeah. And all of a sudden, and I asked but even before that, it was like the gastroenterologist said, we'll probably find polyps, or maybe you have celiac. Like there's something else. Like there was no thought to, you have life-threatening disease. Yeah. And so came out of that with that information, like you have colon cancer and it's urgent. And so for me, like the immediate was shock, physiological shock. How do we talk to the kids? How do we talk to our families? How are we going to get through this? And I was a journalist by training. So I spent many years as a newspaper journalist. Like I was a researcher. Of course, I immediately go online and look, okay, stage. And by that time we did a CAT scan, and I did have spread in my liver. And what are the statistics for stage 4 colon cancer? Well, 5 years survival is only less than 15% still. And it was immediately going from middle of my life, raising a family, to face in a fight for my life. And first was shock. And then second was, and it's even hard to talk about when I think about it, because I fell into a deep pit of despair, grief so intense that I didn't know how to handle it. I fell into a clinical depression, incredible health anxiety, to the point where probably 3 or 4 months after my diagnosis, as I was starting chemo and getting ready for my first surgery, I was not functional. The kids would get up in the morning, they would get off to school. My wife she's a teacher, she would go to school, and I would pretend to have a brave face on. And when they left, I would spend a lot of days completely isolated and crying, like on the couch, on the bed, completely. I fell into a place of deep brokenness. Yeah. And that is, I give myself grace at this point, looking back on it. But at the time, that also contributed to a deep feeling of shame. I felt ashamed that somehow I had gotten cancer, and that I felt ashamed that somehow I wasn't responding to it right. That I would look out at like how to cope with cancer, and all you see is this positivity. Like we're raising money and running 5Ks, and I'm working full time, going through chemo and all this positive stuff. And I wasn't working because of my mental health, not even because of my cancer. So I felt like a complete failure.
Yeah. It's interesting that you share that, because I mean, I'm like 35, 36 years into my cancer journey, and the phrase toxic positivity has started to bubble up when you're talking with other cancer survivors, that somehow we've gotten into this habit of glossing over the experience by saying, if you can basically climb Mount Everest and raise money for cancer research, that's when you're a true survivor. And
Yes.
sometimes just putting one foot in front of the other that's the biggest win of all.
And especially for men, like I didn't see stories of people struggling.
Yeah.
Whether it's movies or magazines or even online, like you look it up, like how to go through this, and you just see people with that toxic positivity. And it's really difficult to be like, what's wrong with me that I'm struggling with all this? So like, I was basically like, am I just the outlier? Am I weak? Or are other men kind of going through this too, but they don't have permission to talk about it?
Yeah. So this is the Dreamers to Disruptors podcast, and you certainly had a dream. You might not have realized it was a dream at that time, but about a year into your diagnosis and your journey, you had a moment. You want to share what that moment was, and how really disruptive
Yeah.
that was?
A lot of people going through cancer don't have really strong support systems. I have always had that. I've had an incredibly supportive spouse, supportive children, supportive extended family, supportive community. I've had all the layers of support, and I still fell into that place of total isolation. And I think if I didn't have that support, I probably would have stayed there. There was a moment towards the end of 2018. So we're coming up on, 9 months of going through cancer and all that stuff. And I was again in that broken place. And fortunately, I will shout out my wife, Sarah. She gave me some tough love and really confronted me in the most loving way possible. And she said, like, you need to get help. You need help. And I remember one night around Christmas, we were really having this struggle as a couple, and our kids were sleeping downstairs, and we were talking just about what to do. And I told her, I'm going to die of this disease, and I'm going to abandon you. I just want to go up to the woods of northern Maine and disappear, because I feel like I'm a burden on this family. And I just want, I'm not going to recover from this. I just need to go away. And she's like, fuck that. I don't know if I can say that here, but I just did. Bleep it out if necessary. Fuck that. You're staying right here. You just need help, right? And I said, I'm just so afraid that I'm going to die and they're going to remember me as sick. And I'll never forget this moment, because she looked at me and she took a pause, and she was like, I knew she was going to say something that was going to hurt. And I looked at her and I said, you need to just say it. And she looked at me and she said, I'm not afraid they're going to remember you as sick. I'm afraid they're going to remember you as sad.
Yeah.
And it was like a sledgehammer to me, because I'm not a sad person.
Yeah.
Like you've known me, like you see me, like I'm outward. I like my alone time, but I'm also an extrovert. I love doing things like this. I love meeting people, but at that point I was trapped inside myself.
Yep.
And that's sometimes what cancer does. And when she said that, if this were the movies, I would have been like, oh, I'm okay now. Like everything's good. But it was that moment where I said to her, I looked at her, I was like, you're right. And I said, I didn't get into this pit overnight. I'm also not going to get out of this pit overnight. But I can promise you this, no matter if I live one more year or another or decades, I'm going to do something each day from now on that's going to get me back to being the husband and the dad that you know and that you love.
Yep.
And that was the Shawshank. I'd say it in my book, like the Shawshank Redemption moment, where it's get busy living or get busy dying. Yep. But the trick is that I couldn't climb out of the pit on my own. So that is when I started to come from inside myself to outside, and I started getting help for myself. I started meeting people online, walking this road. I started going to the Dempsey Center in Maine, doing group counseling. I got an individual therapist who helped save my life. Because to be honest, and this is still somewhat shameful to even talk about, my will to live was kind of hanging on. Not even from my cancer, but just like from all the shit that I talked to you about.
Yep.
I was having suicidal thoughts. When you're in that clinical space of depression, you're not thinking rationally.
No, you're not.
And so, but by getting that help, I'll call out my Patty, if you're listening, you saved my life. You know this. I went into my therapist's floor. Cancer blows you into a million pieces, and you have to put it back together. And it's not going to look like what it did before, but you have to put it back together in a way that is a kind of a new ongoing self. And Patty did that for me. And the Dempsey Center did that for me. Colon Town, the Colon Club, the different groups, they all saw me, helped me. And so that even though my cancer has never relented, so I've gone through 7 open abdominal surgeries, more than 100 rounds of chemo and or immunotherapy. I've been in the physical trenches for a long time. But it's the emotional piece that's been the hardest. Right. And so getting that help from those other people, because there are helpers, there are so many helpers out there and they're ready to help you. But until you make that decision, you're lost. And so I will thank my wife forever for giving me what I needed to hear at that time.
Mm-hmm. So from those experiences, you still saw a need for another community, right?
Yeah. So when I would go into the Dempsey Center in person, I would sit down at group with like 10 to 12 women and maybe one other guy. And for me at the time, like my body I wasn't going to live if I didn't get that support. So I was ready for it. I would go into group and I'd be sobbing and all these, and I'd be held by all these other people, mostly women. And that's where I started to see the gap. All the support spaces I went, if they were co-ed, right, which most of them are, or they're geared towards women, it was always at least 3 to 1 women to men seeking support. And so that was like clicked in my head. I was like, if this is saving my life and pushing me towards doing all this amazing stuff, and we know that men are isolating at a higher rate and they're not engaging in resources, then what could I do to help solve for that problem?
Mm-hmm. So what was the solution?
Well, the solution was creating a community at first, like creating a man. In cancer, there's co-ed communities, there's women to women communities, and there's men to men communities, but those are fewer, and usually they're designed around solving a problem. So disease state, prostate community, testicular community, different groups where men's cancer communities. And what I saw was oftentimes those groups were oriented around fixing the problem, like guys' mentality at a population level, I will say, right? Guys' mentality to, I have this problem, I got to fix it. Like, what treatment are you on? What are you doing? It was all the mechanics of it. There was no place to say, but how are you doing?
Yeah.
How is your heart? How are you feeling? How are you coping? And so that's how Man Up to Cancer came up in my head, is this idea of like, we need a space that is male to male, guy to guy, where we can role model vulnerability, accepting help, walking the road together instead of walking apart. So at the end of 2019, I'm just ruminating on all these issues. And I'm like, Man Up to Cancer came about because it's tongue in cheek. Because when you think man up, you think, don't burden others, keep it all inside until it kills you. To get up on your horse and ride. And I will say that rugged individualism is not inherently bad. Like if you need to fix something around your house or do a other problem, like sometimes that's actually really good. Perseverance, individual, rugged mentality. But when it comes to going through a life-threatening disease, it's really, really damaging. So I came up with the concept of Man Up to Cancer, and all around the imagery of a wolf pack. Wolves are incredibly social animals. They care for one another. If one wolf is sick or injured, the other wolves rally around that wolf and help him back to health. Or if he passes away, they have mourning ritual. And I'm like, why are men with cancer like stuffing everything inside and just going through this alone? Like, why shouldn't we be a wolf pack? And so that was when Man Up to Cancer became a community. I said, I'm starting this thing called Man Up to Cancer. It's my own call to action for men to avoid isolation and go through this as a pack rather than doing it alone. And I thought one of two things is going to happen. People are going to think this is the cheesiest thing ever. Like, I'm going to join a wolf pack. What are you talking about? This is dumb. Or they're going to be like, hell yeah, like I will ride with that. And 6.5 years after doing that, the answer has been a resounding, people crave it. They want to connect. They want to ride with us, and they want to be part of a pack. Like they realize that we're stronger, smarter, better off together than we are as lone wolves. The lone wolf is isolated, vulnerable, not protected. So that's a metaphor that has really hit home.
Absolutely. Yeah. So our paths crossed very early on, I think, in your journey online. So we've known each other online for a long time now. And one of the things that I want to highlight about, what I learned about Man Up to Cancer many, many years ago was something that I've really held on to. Your organization in particular highlights this really stark contrast in how differently men and women approach a diagnosis. And I love that you actually call this out on the website, the Man Up to Cancer website. Women tend to reach out and men tend to check out, right? And what you've done with the Man Up to Cancer idea, I think you probably had a moment in time where you realized that this is a cultural disruption that we have to go through, where men can no longer, that you just can't behave like this.
Yes.
And it's going to be detrimental.
We're getting diagnosed later and dying sooner. Yeah. Period.
And I think the fact that you've got that sort of baked into the ethos of the organization really speaks volumes for how you are sort of flipping this on its head and saying, guys, we can do better.
Absolutely.
We're here for each
and
other.
I will put an asterisk on this. I always say, when I'm talking about male behavior, I'm talking from a population level. Mm-hmm. Behavioral science shows us that there's differences in the way that the sexes respond to disease, go through it. Yep. There is lots of scientific literature. So as a former journalist, I dove into all that literature about how men and women respond, what the differences are. So there are clear differences. But I want to say individual results may vary. We know not every guy struggles with isolation. Not every woman feels comfortable reaching out, but we're looking at behavioral science and we're looking at trends and patterns. So for example, if you were to walk by a cancer center or a cancer resource hub and you looked in the window and you saw a group of women around a circle, maybe holding hands, maybe crying, maybe being vulnerable together, you'd be like, oh, this is like a Wednesday. If you saw a bunch of guys doing it, you'd probably be like, that's interesting, because that's our culture and that's how we're conditioned. So it's all about permission. In our culture, women have had permission to reach out, to lean on their friends, to be vulnerable. That's normalized. Whereas a lot of guys, are taught that is weak, and that's being vulnerable is wrong. Showing your emotions is wrong. And that's why the male to male piece is important too, because even in 2026 now, there are a lot of men who do not want to show up in a co-ed environment in front of women and talk about their deepest insecurities, what they're going through with cancer, how badly they're hurting, their sexual dysfunction, all that shit. There's a lot of guys do not want to do that, and we shouldn't expect them to. Mm-hmm. A lot of these guys in Man Up to Cancer community, they haven't even heard another man, even their dad, tell them I love you in an authentic, supportive way. And they come in and it's culture shock for them. They're like, oh my God, all these dudes they're saying they love one another, right? And this is okay. So that's the culture piece that's really what the change that we see. Mm-hmm. When we talk about disruption, it's getting to that point where you can keep your man card. I love the guys that go bench press huge weights in the morning and then they drive their truck and then they go to their counselor or therapist and then they come onto a Man Up to Cancer Zoom and they're okay crying in front of the guys about what they're going through. There's room for that in the modern man.
Yeah.
And so cancer opens the door by bringing us together. But then I think it's really more growth than that. What we're talking about is really like masculinity and the evolution of it.
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear because I've had my own experiences with support groups over the year where, I would walk in as a young adult into a room that I was the youngest person by 50 years,
Right.
seeking support. And I'm like, wow, this isn't for me. So I think what you have to do in part of this cancer journey is find your tribe,
That's it.
find your wolf pack, and be able to connect with people that are really going to help you.
Absolutely. And what we see is like the men who engage with Man Up to Cancer, they're layering their communities. They might come to us for that peer-to-peer guy support, then go to various other communities to meet their needs. My point to anyone is just that isolating and going it alone is not an option. That isolation, and there's more science coming about this all the time, where isolation is leading to poor quality of life, substance abuse, broken relationships, suicide, and ultimately poor medical outcomes. There was a meta study done, I forget the journal, but there was a study that came out last year showing that isolation during survivorship leads to a 33% higher chance of mortality from any cause and 11% higher risk of cancer-related death than people who are part of communities. So you nailed it.
Yeah. Community is a key. And I think that it's this understated need that goes unfulfilled for a long time. And I think to pull it back into even the clinical trial realm, community for me has always been the missing part. That you hear pharma companies all the time talk about, we can't find patients. Well, you're not reaching into the communities where these patients are. You're not
building
helping.
those relationships.
You're not
Yeah.
building the relationships. You're not building the communities where these patients might be. And the response is always, the community is the hardest thing to do. Well, if you need 1,000 patients for a clinical trial, you better roll up your sleeves and start to understand what the community needs. Like, what are your?
No, they just want to drop in when they need you.
Yeah. I mean, so what does the wolf pack say about, the clinical trial experience? What, from your perspective as a patient leader, what do you wish these companies were doing to advance clinical trials and make them more prevalent?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's building real relationships, not just when you're trying to recruit.
Yeah.
And that's what we hear a lot from the companies is like, oh, we want to build relationships, but we don't have funding for it right now. And then maybe a trial like is being expanded and all of a sudden they want to be your best friend.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that, especially with our wolf pack. Like we are very protective of our guys. We're not to be extracted. We're not. Yeah. That's not the way that you should approach patients in any way. It feels very manipulative, feels very extractive. So the best companies are the ones that are building real inroads and not just necessarily financial funding, which is nice. That is also helpful because nonprofits fill those gaps that industry and the medical system aren't filling on their own, right, and where they can't go safely. So financial support, but also connecting about having ongoing relationships with the leaders in the patient advocacy groups, across the disease types that are real and ongoing. And then if you need assistance, like you have to build trust. And honestly, we don't have the greatest track record of trust building between patient communities and industry.
Right.
And, I think this is the point where I need to thank you. This is really important to me. Building trusting relationships and standing up for what we deserve as patients and the right way to interact with us comes from a history of turning away from the old model where we were just, all of our data was extracted. We were subjects. We had no power. We had no voice. And you have been a true champion and trailblazer for us all of us who are doing that work now. We've depended on and stood on the shoulders of giants like yourself who have gone through hell to knock down those doors and show why that we deserve not just a seat at the table that's tokenism, but an actual voice at the table. Oh, and by the way, turns out it's really good economically as well. Like there's no excuse anymore for not engaging patients in the clinical trial ecosystem from start to finish. Although there's so much work still to be done, but the progress that's been made since you started your work, we could do, how many episodes could we do with this podcast on that?
I don't know. I'll have to check with management. Can we get a couple more podcasts?
Could we take a couple minutes though for you to look back and think about those early days of trying to get the voices heard?
Honestly, I think my advocacy journey started because I couldn't find a community. Yeah, I really could not find a community. Every support group I walked into, I was always the youngest, or had gone through treatment, and people were still in active treatment. I just didn't fit. And you sort of wind the clock. So I had Hodgkin's disease when I was a kid. I had breast cancer because of all the treatment that I had from Hodgkin's. So when I was going through the breast cancer, I thought, oh, I'll finally find a community. And, I walk into the breast cancer community, and I'm still the youngest one there. I'm still, then they're like, well, you've had Hodgkin's, you don't really fit the breast cancer profile. And I'm like, what? Like, I don't belong anywhere. And I finally went online and was like, screw it. Like, I'm building my own community because I need to talk to somebody. I need to find somebody that understands what it means to live a life with cancer, or these pockets of dealing with a life that you've got cancer here and there. And I wasn't finding anybody. And when I did find an online community, I was shocked at how hard it was not only to build one, but learning about the industry and trying to find clinical trials. Like, why are we making this so hard? You've got patients everywhere if you open your eyes and look. And I think that was really what drove my advocacy from the very beginning. Is we've got to solve this problem, because this is nuts. This is crazy. We're spending, how many millions of dollars in post-marketing clinical trials to go back and assess something that could have been done the first time through if they just had the right patient set or the right population of patients involved in that trial. How many millions of dollars, billions of dollars have we wasted? How many lives have been lost because we're not efficient? Like, how can we sleep at night when we know that there's so much that we still can accomplish?
Well, I think you're the shining example of something that really, really it's time for the airing of the grievances here. We're going to list them out. When you become a patient, all of a sudden that puts you in a box that's all you are.
Yep.
And we are so much more than that label. You've always been so much more than that label. Like, what you can bring to the table with your skills. You're skilled in organizations and community building and insights into the clinical trials, all this stuff. And it's like, a lot of them still want to push that away because you're a patient. It's like, well, they're just a patient, and that history of this wall. But what you bring, and what so many other patient advocates bring, is all of your skills that you've developed before your patienthood, through your patienthood, after, not related to your disease. And then you bring your lived experience into that, and you're like a super person, right? Superhero. And I think the companies that are doing it right get that, and they're like, we want Alicia. Like, look at Medidata. They're like, okay, yeah, look at what you're bringing to the table, rather than just putting us in this box of they're just a patient. Like, we're so much more than that. So and again, I just want to say thank you for everything you've done for all of us.
Well, you're too kind. And I really appreciate that you say that. But I think the thing that I love about Man Up to Cancer is, you're giving everybody else a sledgehammer to keep breaking these walls down. And that's what your community is doing. You've got the wolf pack mentality, but at the same time, you're protecting each other, but also advancing what it means to deal with cancer.
Yes. So thank you for that. And also, one thing that we also see coming out of our community is that some people come in totally broken, like I was. They find brotherhood, support. They get to a point in their own journey where they're looking around being like, oh, how do I become a patient advocate? How do I get involved in policy or advocacy or clinical trials and all this stuff? And one of the things way at the beginning of Man Up to Cancer that really, really triggered me was people would send me photos from policy conferences and advocacy conferences. And there's 30 women. And again, there's 2 guys involved. And it's men are depending on their sisters and their wives and their aunts and their mothers to go out and advocate for them. We need to be in the rooms,
Yeah.
not just for the men, but for all of us. So I like to think of May Have to Cancer as trying to be also an incubator for that next generation of advocates so that we find a little more balance. Like we all should be involved in this, regardless if we're men or women. So watch out for the next generation because I hope they're coming.
So, just I guess, in a wrap up sort of way,
Sure.
um, what's your call to action for our listeners? What would you like to challenge the audience to do to either improve the clinical trial experience, the patient experience? What should they know about patient communities? I mean, I know this is a loaded question, but
Oh boy, I'm gonna need a second on that one. I think my call to action is start where you are. It's start where you are because there was a time early on in my disease when I wanted to get involved, like at the Dempsey Center, they had some opportunities. Like I have almost 20 years in journalism and communications and PR and all this stuff. And like they had a need for that. And I wanted to like say, like, can I help you? But I was also thinking like, I don't know if because I'm sick, if I'm not good enough to help, or if I'm depressed, does that mean I'm not good enough to like, there was all these limiting talk. Like, can I actually contribute even if I'm going through treatment and doing all this stuff? And sometimes there's that voice that's like, oh, what do you have to add? And I said, yes. And then I said yes to getting involved in Colon Town. And if I didn't, I never would have started any of this. I wouldn't have met all the role models that I didn't know how to be a leader of a community or build community or an advocate. None of us know how to do that. We have to learn from others. So I think like if you're out there and maybe you're going through cancer or a family member is going through cancer and you feel a call to get involved in policy or advocacy or clinical trial design, listen to that voice. There are people like Alicia, like me, like so many others who will welcome you into the movement and give you roles in it. There are roles to play, but you have to feel like you're worthy enough. And sometimes patients struggle with that and feel like, am I worthy of having a voice? You are, and you should. So reach out. So I wish there was like a guide that we could send these people. Maybe we should work on that. Like, here's your guide to like cause I remember literally Googling, how do I become a patient advocate?
Yeah.
And like just finding people like you and others out there and like trying to figure it out. And maybe there is no roadmap. Maybe there is no specific guide, but there are patients. So if let's say you are affected by a specific disease type, there's patient advocacy groups for pretty much most disease states these days. And there's the rare disease space as well. So oftentimes it starts by just connecting with, in colorectal cancer, there's 6 or 8 national nonprofits that can plug you into these spaces and as a volunteer, and you just start learning. And once you start learning, you see more of the landscape and you see more of what people do and you get drawn to certain areas of it. My lane early on was colorectal cancer, early onset awareness, and I'm still involved with those things, but my calling was to help other men navigate this disease and the ripple effect that has on their families and their people and their communities. That was my calling for me. But for those listening out there, there's also a place for you too. And you're going to find it. And it's almost like magic. I would love to, I know,
Yeah.
I know we're probably going over, but whatever. How did you discover, I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but you're building community, but then you started learning how to do it and learning from other people.
Yeah.
You had role models as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you just, like you said, I don't know that I actually Googled how to become a patient advocate, but I'm sure I had something very similar back in the early days of Google where, you're starting to look, and I think it was also the leaders that you meet at the hospital or the cancer center. You start, if you really open your eyes and look,
Yeah.
and when there's a switch, I think that goes, I'm willing to make these relationships. I'm willing to, spend the time that's going to be needed to sort of change the way I'm thinking about my cancer journey. And I think that when you get to that point,
Totally.
that's when the magic happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the final advice based on that is start where you are. You can start small. Like if you serve a couple people, that's fantastic. How great is that?
Yep.
Or maybe you get involved and then you progress into helping more. And like, it's about the quality of those relationships. So start where you are and know that you're enough. And know that what you bring to the table, sometimes you see maybe your damage or your baggage or what you've been through as a limitation. Well, I'm telling you, in the cancer resource and support space, it is a superpower.
Yeah.
Like what you've learned going through that and what you continue to go through is actually an asset. It's clinical trial designers think in one language. If you're going through the patient experience, it's a whole different language, and they need to hear from you. So I encourage you to get involved.
I love it. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
It's been an absolute honor.
Yeah. We'll have to come up with another podcast topic
Well, and I'm going to invite you right now onto the Man Up to Cancer podcast, and you're not going to escape the gauntlet of random questions either. So it's been an absolute honor. You're such a hero and role model to me. Thank you for bringing me in to do this with you.
Thanks for coming to Medidata.
Thank you for tuning in to today's conversation. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions for me or thoughts about the episode, drop them in the comments. I do read them. Thanks again for listening to From Dreamers to Disruptors, and we'll see you again next time.